Testing, testing, 1, 2, sound check. We're looking good, thank you.
Now can you hear me okay? Okay, again, there are seats down in front. Seriously, there are seats down in front, so feel free to come down. Prior to introducing our keynote speaker, our guest speaker, what I would like to do is thank the Professional Development Committee, and especially Crystal Morris and Carrie Mayer for their work. And they have done an absolutely phenomenal job of bringing us some wonderful speakers, wonderful events to help the college move forward, both in its professional development, but also its accreditation standards. So again, thank you to Crystal, the PDC, and also to Carrie. Thank you very much. Okay. I had the pleasure of talking to Darrick this morning, just to get to know Darrick, and he's just a pleasure to talk to. He's from the Bay Area. His parents came in the 1940s to Oakland, and so he's been in the Bay Area. So we talked a lot about cold weather like Chicago, and he said, no, can't do that. He said he's tired of the snow, can't do that, but he's a pleasure to talk to this morning. Darrick is currently a faculty member at the University of San Francisco, and his research interests, as you know from Carrie's email, include cultural responsiveness to discipline practices and equity in our community college and pedagogy. His experience includes his role as the co-principal of the June Jordan School for Equity in San Francisco, as well as his work as a founder in what's called Triumph, a program for young folks, young people that teach students the fundamental principles of the fields of sociology, feminism, and critical theory. And such as his work has led him to be awarded the University of California's Fannie Lou Hamer Award for commitment to social change, and a commendation from the California State Senate for his work on violence prevention and youth development. And his work has led him to consult with both colleges as well as high schools. So it's our honor to have Darrick here, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation that Darrick will have in this keynote, but especially our breakout sessions. Because I think what you'll find is the words that Darrick will share with you will really lay the foundation for our district's conversation next year on equity, diversity, and student success. And without further ado, Darrick, thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Okay. Hi. Let me grab my clicker here. I actually don't like PowerPoint, so it's perfect to stand in front of a big one when you don't like it. I don't mind watching it, so if you use it, I think it's a great strategy and it's an excellent tool, so I'm not politically opposed to PowerPoints. I get wrapped up in them sometimes. I'll be with you for a little bit of time today. My breakout session will hopefully be able to go into a lot more detail as opposed to the things I mentioned here. Right now I have a plan for that breakout session, but I'm willing to throw it out if I say enough controversial things that make you want to yell at me in the breakout session. I'd rather prefer to give folks the opportunity to engage with me in a spirited dialogue than go through my planned exercise. So I appreciate the great introduction as well, and it's an honor to be here. I've secretly desired to come up here for a very long time from the Bay Area. When you're searching different community colleges and you look at the pictures online and you're like, oh, that one looks nice, that one looks all right, and then you see this place and you're like, oh, wow, because you have this picture of it like sitting on the beach and like birds chirping and like faculty riding bicycles around campus. You kind of have this great picture of it, and I'm a banana slug. I went to UC Santa Cruz, And so it kind of reminds me of my second home, which is that particular university. So it's great to come up here and actually see that, it actually fits the online profile. It's kind of like a great experience with online dating, which I haven't had, but it's really cool to see that the actual experience matches the pictures. So I am from Oakland and born and raised there, and that situates my particular idea of my identity, and it also really shapes my worldview, both politically and culturally. And so I never make any apologies for it, but it's always important for folks to kind of be aware of that. Sometimes you start talking and then they say, where did you get this weird person from? And then usually if you say, well, he's from Oakland, I go, oh, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Now he's kind of a nutcase, and that's okay for me. But what it means for me is that I had the experience of growing up in a very, very diverse location. Very diverse location. And I also grew up in a very special situation in that city in which I had the experience, which was pretty normalized, of cross-cultural, cross-racial solidarity. So I didn't really grow up having racial issues with my white neighbors, with my Latino neighbors, folks I grew up with, Asian folks. I didn't grow up with those racial problems being a normal thing. As a matter of fact, I didn't really experience African American to Latino conflict until I became a principal in San Francisco. I heard of it, but I never really experienced it growing up in Oakland. I thought it was strange. I had a kid come to school once with a Spanish slang term, a derogatory term for African Americans written on his tennis shoes. And one of my teachers said, this kid has a term that kind of means cockroaches on his tennis shoes. And I said, why would a kid write about insects on his tennis shoes? It must be a special interest that he has there. And I said, no, it's not scientific. It's that it's kind of a racial slur and it's a thing. And I was confused by this kid. I said, how can you be from the Bay Area and have a beef with African Americans? Like, it's such a special thing to be in a place where there's African Americans, and I don't know how you could have problems with it. That was my real first time really encountering that. But anyway, long story short, so I'm from Oakland. I went to Oakland Tech High School, which is a public high school. I'm an all public schools guy. I was, number 9, number 10, maybe 12 in my family to attend that. No, I was either 9 or 10 because my sister and my cousins. So anyway, a lot of people in my family went to that one school. Okay, the Pointer Sisters went to Oakland Tech, if you're old enough. Clint Eastwood spent some time at Oakland Tech. Baseball player Ricky Henderson went to Oakland Tech. If you're a football fan, Marshawn Lynch, the Seattle Seahawks, is an Oakland Tech graduate. Huey P. Newton, one of the founders of Black Panther Party, graduated with my mother in 1959. So I'm an old school guy, raised by old school values with old school parents. They met at Oakland City College in 1961, and my parents have been together ever since. They got married in 68, and they've been annoying me ever since, okay? And from Oakland Tech, I went to UC Santa Cruz. From UC Santa Cruz, I did some graduate work at Cal State Hayward, which is now Cal State East Bay. Left that program and went and studied some crazy stuff, studied revolutions for 2.5 years at New College of California in San Francisco. And then later on, after doing the principal thing and some policy work for under the Chancellor's Foundation for California Community Colleges, I ended up being at USF. So currently, I'm an assistant professor of educational leadership at the University of San Francisco. So I work with folks trying to get their degree in what they think leadership is, and I work in the administrative credential program, training school principals, and work with folks getting their doctorate, and in folks in the higher education student affairs program. So for all the student services folks, I get to delve deep into those issues on a regular basis. Okay, try to get that intro done with relatively quickly. So you kind of know who I am. I'm a Japanese animation fan, big anime fan, sci-fi nerd. The first conferences and the most important conferences in my life, actually, are science fiction conventions. And anime conventions. Japanese is my foreign language, took it in high school and in college. And so I'm kind of nerdy. I'm a Sagittarius, and I ride a motorcycle or two, okay? I like long walks on the beach, and no, I'm just joking. Okay, so anyhow, so when I usually engage with folks around issues of equity, it's an instructional conversation, usually because we're in the United States, and the United States has not been very good at, as a function of the establishment, covering issues of equity and justice in our educational system. So we're not very good at that. So most folks can spend their entire K-12 career not really exploring issues in depth that have to do with life and death of our most targeted populations, or really, as we'll talk about a little bit later, some of the issues of suffering and sorrow that they may experience in their own lives, whether they're privileged or targeted in one way or the other. So we end up spending a lot of time intaking information that doesn't really address how we exist on a daily basis. And you end up with a lot of folks struggling and suffering as they try to make sense of their world, yet they went through several years of education about so-called the world, and they still can't make sense of their own very location, okay? And it's very hard for folks, and I know that this area of our state has some experience with dealing with some of those very tough issues. So when we talk about these things, though, we tend to get some of our terms confused. So I'm not going to talk to you like you don't know anything, because I never talk to my colleagues or my students like they don't know anything, okay? I believe and I'm invested in theories of critical pedagogy. So in that, I assume my students know a great deal and my colleagues know a great deal, and that we are sharing information and learning together. I'm not inputting anything new into your brain, ever, but perhaps providing a framework for which you can organize some of the things you already know and know. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm not a know-it-all. I just know a few things. So we want to distinguish, though, first and foremost, when we get into these issues, the difference between some of these terms. I'm going to pick two in particular, okay? In our state discourse around equity in the community colleges, we find folks at different locations kind of fluctuating back and forth between the terms equity and diversity. And we want to make sure that we know that those two things are very, very different, and that it's very easy to have one and very difficult to achieve the other, and having one doesn't mean you have the other. Does that make sense? Okay? And I'm talking about, particularly in diversity, I'm thinking in terms of like racial diversity or identity diversity. Even if you have people in a very homogenous space that might be of the same racial identity or gendered identity, you're still going to have other forms of diversity. You're going to have anime fans with big football fans, although those two don't usually go together well, but you're going to have folks that like to work on cars and folks that like to do arts and crafts. I mean, people, human beings are a diverse lot, consciously in terms of interest. But in terms of identity, we want to remember that diversity has to do with having an array of difference located in a space. Okay, as you can see here, the condition of having or being composed of differing elements, variety, especially the inclusion of different types of people, and so on and so on. So therefore, we can have a diverse environment quite easily, but that doesn't necessarily make us more effective at what we do. It doesn't necessarily indicate a healthy environment whatsoever, right? You can have diversity by just shipping a bunch of people in and have them standing around. Okay? It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to treat each other in a humane way. It doesn't mean that they're developing in any particular way. It doesn't mean that there's any particular framework to which they prescribe as a whole. It doesn't mean any of those things. This is a very diverse room. I have no idea how you all get along. You all look really nice, so I'm sure it's great. Okay? But I don't know that, right? And I wouldn't know that just by looking at the diversity in the room. So when institutions are pursuing equity and they're pursuing diversity, they have to make sure that they understand that diversity is actually not the goal. Okay? But instead, equity. Now, the reason I'll come to how equity fits actually into our overall mission as a collection of community college educators. Oh, by the way, I didn't say anything about my professional, well, I did, my professional background, but I'm a former adjunct community college guy. Freeway flyer, multiple campuses. I don't know if you know any adjuncts in the room. Hey, thanks for coming. That's a big deal, okay? Adjuncts at a professional development thing is a big deal. So I used to teach sociology at De Anza College in Cupertino, as well as at Laney College in Oakland. And at one point I did those at the same time. Yeah, people shaking their heads. So it's it's about an hour between the two on the freeway. So I'm a motorcycle rider. So my students always knew when I had to go from one to the next because I'd have my motorcycle. Because I got a carpool lane and violate the law a bit. But anyhow, as community college folks, this is a big deal here, okay? Now, equity, and its difference from equality, you can notice almost immediately, okay? It's not necessarily about whether people get the same thing, okay? It's about justice. Now, the thing about justice is that justice can be interpreted in a variety of ways by a variety of people. So once you start pursuing an equity agenda, it means that you're actually pursuing an agenda that has to be heavily engaged with your community and the students with which you work, because their definition of justice is what matters at that moment, not your own institutional idea of justice, right? And so when we start thinking about the pursuit of justice immediately, to quote critical theorists like Paulo Freire, once you begin thinking or are interested in this idea of humanization, you have to be immediately conscious and aware of dehumanization. It's very similar with the issue of justice. Once you state that you are interested or you declare that there is an interest in pursuing justice, you must immediately become aware in acknowledging injustice. And this is usually where, it's one of the areas in which many educational locations fall short, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Here, I don't like to give a lot of teasers. That's annoying. It's not radio. So what I'm saying is that if we are going to start thinking about pursuing justice, we have to be reflective on how we have perhaps perpetuated injustice as an institution in an unjust or unjust society. Does that make sense? Okay? All right. So these are the pieces for today. Blah, blah, blah. There's books associated with this. Okay. All right. So I want to start by this talking a little bit briefly about the California Master Plan for Higher Education. The reason why I like to do this is because a lot of our colleges have very high rates of adjunct participation, which is how we survive, is through part-timers and adjuncts, which is beautiful, and it's a beautiful thing to have folks be able to come in. But it also means that we often have a large part of our faculty and many of our staff that have not yet been inculcated in the entire history of the California community colleges, and that includes full-timers as well. We have folks that join institutions, they don't really understand the whole context. So I'm going to take some time to talk a little bit about a very particular view on the context of the community colleges. I promise you I won't take long. Is that okay? Okay. All right. So the California Master Plan for Higher Education, 1960 is a very big deal. Okay? If you can imagine the United States coming out of the 1950s, some people like to call that the golden era. If you watch late night television and they have you can buy a set of CDs with all the hits from the 50s. I don't know, anybody seen that? Am I the only one up late? Okay, whatever. But there'll be a commercial and there's people in a diner, and there's somebody on roller skates with, and there's it's an infomercial. Like, don't you miss the 50s? The golden era. And there's like Frankie Valli or somebody singing in the background, right? In the 50s was a very important time. Now my dad, my dad's 76 years old. My dad's like, ain't no such thing as the golden years if you was black. Like those things don't exist. While folks were having fun in their white only diners, like there was a lot of other stuff going on for a lot of other people, right? But anyhow, coming out of the 50s, you know, the United States had a lot of money, mostly due to what had occurred during World War II. We produced roughly a fourth of the world's products, and that's how we got another huge economic boost in our country, and we had a lot of wealth. Well, as that started to run out in the late 50s, going into the 1960s, you had a lot of poverty. You had a continued struggle for rights that became the civil rights movement as we know it. So many of you are very familiar with this, so I'm just kind of recapping where we're at. But what makes this era really important was that during this time, you had the establishment of these open access policies, right? East Coast, West Coast, big deal, okay? California Master Plan was one of those things. And the idea was twofold. One, the differentiation of the functions of the three different systems in the state. One is the University of California, one is the California State University, and then there is the community colleges, okay? Now, I'm just going to tell you right now so I don't forget, the community colleges is the most important one, okay? Now, if you're invested in like certain common American norms of like elitism and like status, like fiction and all these different things, you might believe that because UC has the smallest number, that they are the most important. But actually, if you reverse that and think in terms of class dynamics, workforce dynamics, et cetera, there's no question that the most important higher ed system in our state easily is the California community colleges. So, I mean, by a long shot, okay? But anyhow, and secondly, the establishment of the principle of universal access and choice, okay? Now, that's what makes, if you follow me already, and you can see where I'm coming from, and I'm from Oakland, I told you that crazy stuff. This dynamic here makes the California community colleges a very threatening system, okay? A threatening system to social stratification, a threatening system to racial and gender stratification, an incredibly threatening system overall in a place that has historically maintained power in the hands of a few by limiting access to things such as higher education. So here you have these policies establishing universal access and choice, okay? And this is in California in particular. Okay, so if you see how it breaks down, UC was to select from among the top 1/8. CSU is going to take the top third. And here's the dangerous part right here. The California community colleges were to admit who? Any student capable of benefiting from instruction. Any student, okay? We'll get to later how there's some major issues, of course, we have in actually doing that, okay? One of which is, I don't know, you hire people, many of which that never really taught before, and yet you don't train them to teach, which is always going to be a problem. But anyhow, admit any student capable of benefiting from instruction. Okay, so why is this dangerous? Well, you got the 1960s, okay? Many folks actually migrated from the Bay Area in the late 60s to this region. Good old Humboldt County, call it a hippie haven, some folks call it that. I actually have a slide on hippie haven. Please don't be disrespected. I put it in quotes. It's not my term. I actually don't say the word hippie, actually, because I never knew what that was, actually. So I actually don't use the word. But you have the 1960s, okay? And the 60s are, well, what they were. There's a lot of conflict, okay? There's a lot of poverty. There's Vietnam War jumping off. The racial injustices just continued for centuries. And so you end up with a lot of upheaval. Well, the dangerous part, one of the dangerous parts of this, is that this upheaval was also, for one of the first times in history, recorded for the whole world to see on the advent and the dispersion of televisions, okay? Why is that significant? Because, well, we're in the middle of the Cold War, and we are trying to convince nations around the world to join our side, the democratic capitalist side that is so free, freedom of voice, freedom of choice, freedom of expression. And then you can turn on a TV and see this at your 1968 Democratic Convention. What a great demonstration of freedom. Okay. Now, if you read Christian Parenti's work in Lockdown America, he goes into this in great detail. H. Bruce Franklin also goes to this in the Vietnam War and other, I forgot the rest of the title. I don't want to mess it up. But H. Bruce Franklin goes into this as well. But this is a very important thing because you have an atmosphere in which young people of all different backgrounds are rising up, right? They're fighting against the war and they're fighting against their oppression, and it's being recorded. You have the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, right, trying to draw attention to the fact that the Democrats are not really entertaining the voice of African Americans, right? You have the United Farm Workers. You have the BSU and the ethnic studies movements. You have the American Indian movement. These are all going into the early 70s. You have the Black Panther Party starting in 1966. By 1970, they were feeding more children than the U.S. government, 10,000 kids a day. You had the Brown Berets. You had various Asian American groups as well. You had the Young Lords. All these different groups. And that causes, well, some problems. Right? So Spiro Agnew, Nixon administration, folks identified this upheaval with a special connection. And I'm not going to read all this, but he essentially argued, Spiro Agnew, and this is at an Iowa fundraiser, Agnew argued that there was too high a percentage of black students in college and condemned the, quote, the violence emanating from, can you see this, from black what? Now this is really important, okay? This violence is coming from black student militancy, okay? And declaring that college at one time considered privilege is considered to be a right today, he singled out open admissions as one of the main ways, quote, by which unqualified students are being swept into college on the wave of the new socialism. This is a quote out of H. Bruce Franklin's book, okay? Later that year, Roger Freeman, who had advised both Reagan and Nixon, okay, defined quite precisely the target of the conservative counterattack. Quote, we are in danger of producing an educated proletariat. Okay? That's dynamite. We have to be selective on who we allow to go through higher education. Okay? Now, you have to understand, this is happening as your community college system is developing. Okay? Student militancy, the idea that folks have access to higher education in a way that they didn't have before and are learning particular things that are empowering and perhaps, in this context, politicizing them in such a way so they were countering the status quo of the United States. And that problem was located in the development and the continuation of these open access and open admissions policies. Now, I bring all this up because I always like to set the context for our work. That if you are declaring any interest in equity, any interest in diversity for the purposes of building equity, right, then at this point, we're a little late. All right? The lines were drawn early on in the development of our system, early on, as to precisely how threatening you could be if you did pursue this particular direction. Now, the fact that we haven't had a ton of systemic dialogue over the years could indicate that perhaps we fell to those threats and those perceptions. But the equity issue is a return to what is needed and to what communities have called for, right? But it is going to cause some controversy, okay? So as this happened, you saw a delving into the development of our law enforcement systems and our penal system. From 1970, of course, to 2006, our prison system went up from 200,000 people to 2.6 million people during that time, as the community colleges were actually never funded properly to fulfill their original mission. As early as 3 years ago, you still had a per pupil amount that was actually lower than K-12. Okay, so that's really important. So I'm not going to go through all this, but once you start locking people up, you're going to have all these different dynamics of increased targeted populations having limited access to higher ed, limited access to literacy opportunities, and et cetera. Okay, so I'm going to mention this, but I'm going to come back to it, okay? So why would I talk about all this? Well, because we want to remember that if we are educators and if we are interested in being in an art form, a legacy, a profession that is about the development of human beings, and those human beings are trying to challenge existing structures of stratification in order to live a healthy life, okay? And we're going into this to help them out. We want to be mindful of what it means to us to help them out, how we were trained on what help actually means, how we were shaped and trained in this very structure to see them as full or incomplete human beings. And so we end up with this interesting trouble that we're in. We have folks now that are saying we want to do diversity, we want to do equity, but it's not necessarily easily translated to the ground. Are you following me so far? Okay? And that's not because, I believe, folks aren't truly interested. It's because we've been out of practice so long, and we're at institutions that have discouraged innovation, that have discouraged addressing the tough issues that communities face for so very long, and have been largely underfunded the entire time, that we're out of practice, and we end up with ideological incongruence, both that comes from our inability to manifest it on the ground as human beings, individuals that want to do it but don't know how, and as institutions that aren't properly resourced and out of practice of actually implementing these things. So we end up with an idea of equity, an idea of what race relations or cross-identity relations should be, but we can't actually put it into practice. So the type of racial disparities we see in our system actually are a result of what Henry and Tater called democratic racism. See, that it's an ideology that permits and justifies the maintenance of two apparently conflicting sets of values. That we're here to educate, but we obviously don't educate certain people well, and we haven't. And we're not really doing anything about it. The people that do something about it get marginalized just like the people they were helping. But we want to do something about it, but we don't do anything about it, okay? We want to have a more diverse faculty base, but we don't really do anything about it. We want to have a more diverse student population, but we don't really do anything about it. And that's not necessarily people's desires, okay? But what happens on the ground is you and I know as educators, that's what matters the most. It doesn't really matter what you say. I mean, that's old school. Okay, my dad used to say, don't nobody want to hear you talk about that, just go do it. Right? Did you mow the lawn? Nah, Dad, but see, what I was going to do, nobody asked you what you was going to do. Did you mow the lawn? Is the lawn mowed? Well, no, I mean, you know it's not. But don't tell me what I know, just tell me what you're about to do. Well, I'm about to go mow the lawn, that's what I'm about to do, right? That's old school. Show me, okay? Don't get all highfalutin and try to convince me, I don't want to hear any hustle. My dad is still like that. My mom's like that too. I don't care if you got a doctorate. I know what hustling sound like. Okay, and you got all these educators talking about equity, and we want to meet the needs of people, and we want to meet the needs of poor people, and we want to be engaged scholars, and we want to be engaged teachers, and we want a safe and multicultural environment. And it's like, nah, I want to see it. You don't need to tell me, tell each other. You don't need to tell us, so tell each other, right? Okay, so in the California Master Plan, as it has been ratified over the years, in 1987, it was very clear. Now, 87, are you seeing this? 87. Hello? 87. Okay, not 97, not 2007, 87, okay? Declared that equity was a key issue for the whole system to face. We're in 2016. Student Success Act came out in 2012. This is 1987, okay? Educational equity goes beyond the legal guarantee of access to education. It is an environment of fairness and responsiveness necessary for each person to fully reach his or her educational potential, right? We're shifting from this question of access to actual justice work, right? Are y'all following me here? Okay? That when we think in terms of diversity, we're thinking in terms of access, right? As long as we have the doors open, people get to come, they get to come in, they get to have a seat, we're doing our job. No, that's not it, okay? Access does not push the question of whether or not you're doing an effective job and what effectiveness actually means. See, access doesn't mean that you're critiquing your own pedagogy. Access doesn't mean that you're aware of perhaps the functional and or dysfunctional relationships between faculty and staff or each group within itself. If you're just open to access, you don't have to be responsive to the community at all. You just open the doors and let them come in. You don't need to know what's happening in the tribal nations. You don't need to know what's happening in the Asian community. You don't need to know what's happening to some of our lower income white students. You don't need to know any of that when you're just opening the door and say, hey, we got access, okay? So we want to push it to a level where we're thinking of these things, okay? We will not succeed as a society, again, 1987, unless there is a commitment by the state and our educational institutions to equip all people to fully participate in and contribute to the growth of social institutions, okay? So we're in a place now, and I said this in a couple of locations. I don't know if people were very happy about it. I don't even know if you're happy now. So, you know, if you got rocks or anything, just save it for the breakout session, right? But I've said this over and over again in other spaces, okay? And I was in Southern California at a place, and someone had expressed to one of the administrators that brought me, said, why was he yelling at us all the time? Okay, now, again, I'm just passionate, right? I mean, it's old school stuff. Like, I don't come from a quiet community. You know, the German family across the street from me, the Italian family up the street, the Jewish family 2 doors down, like, we all yelled at each other. Hey, what's up? Hey, it's just a normal thing. My dad grew up in Alameda, surrounded by African Americans and Italian and Portuguese, and they all yell till this day. I mean, I don't know how they're that old and still yelling, but they all do it. It's okay. But one of the things I like to express is that I'm angry too. I'm angry too, right? That how do you have such declarations in 87 and declare yourself innovating in 2012 with the Student Success Act? Or as I would challenge folks at the Student Success Conference, if you're just now starting to talk about completion, what have you been talking about all these years? UC doesn't have to wait 30 years to talk about completion. You know when you're complete and you go to University of California. You have this many years. And this is when everybody expects you to leave, and this is when your parents expect to stop paying, okay? Similar with Cal State University, okay? So why is it when you talk to the most populated system, over 2 million students a year, you're not even clear on what completion is? You don't know, as well as degree, it's certificate, it's transfer. No, Darrick, it's all the above. Well, the gentleman out of Michigan, Peter Barr, who we worked with at Learning Works when I was doing policy work, he did this great segmentation study on community colleges. And he said, well, one of the things that you're not paying attention to is that this is an open access kind of pay-to-play-as-you-go space. So you have some people that will come in, take 3 classes that they wanted to take, get A's in those 3 classes, and leave. He said that could be as much as 1/3 of your population. But you don't know what to call that. Is that completion? Did they quit? Were they underperforming because they only took 3 classes and left, but they got all A's, so they certainly wanted to, but you don't even know what to call it. And by the way, you've had a long time to figure this out. And you haven't. So part of 90% of my volume has to do with just me being excited and passionate. But the other 10% is, I believe, a righteous anger. people pay money to be educated. And you serve more people of color in the California community colleges than UC and CSU combined have students. They have about 670,000 students, just under 700,000 students between both those systems. California community colleges have almost 1 million students of color alone. Excuse me, almost 1 million Black, Latino, and Asian students alone. Okay? And something in me, maybe it's my political framework, but something in me makes me feel like if that demographic was different, you would have been talking about completion a little bit more often. And based on what I presented in terms of some of the national threats that these people of color in these locations, such as New York and California, have posed, that there's something conveniently coincidental about the fact that one system that serves all these people in this particular location can get away with not discussing completion of an educational institution for this many years. So that's why I sometimes raise my voice, because folks are like, I don't get it. Well, I don't understand why you're not pissed off. I don't get that. And by the way, the beautiful thing is when you talk to faculty and student services folks, they tend to be pissed off. That's the cool part, right? They tend to be like, yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. I know exactly what you mean, right? Okay. All right. So I'll skip some of this. So isn't that a beautiful picture? I think that's just he's a handsome guy. You can't, I mean, he's a handsome guy. I mean, disagree with his policies all you want, but he's a handsome guy. You know what I mean? There's a lot of handsome-looking politicians that I completely disagree with. But anyway, so I don't disagree with him all the time. But anyhow, so why do I have his picture up? Well, because I wanted to contextualize kind of where we're at. See, based on the frustrations I just spoke of, I don't know if we would even be discussing equity and completion if it wasn't for the economic collapse during his presidency. The 2008 Great Recession, I like how they renamed it, you know what I mean? Just call it a recession. People are broken on the streets, let's call it a recession, right? So the Great Recession was startling, right? Folks were losing their homes, they were losing their jobs, it was a mess, right? And so the idea was like, we can get Americans back to work. How do we get them back to work? Oh, we need to get them ready for perhaps new careers, get them prepared for the biotech industry, all this stuff, right? But guess what? We don't have an institution prepared to do that in the United States. We don't just have those places around every community. Just go down the street and learn how to get a new job. That's not everywhere. So what was discovered is like the only place we have that wouldn't cause a dramatic disruption to our educational system or our training system are the United States community colleges. These are the only places to do it. Remember, if you're going to a four-year university, there's strict admissions requirements, okay? There's a capacity that they have that is fairly limited, okay? And to send someone like my uncle to Cal is going to be tough. Are y'all following this? Okay? I mean, he'd enjoy it, I'm sure, but I'm thinking of one particular uncle. He would enjoy it, but he knows a lot. I mean, adult learners, y'all work with them. Like, you know, when you're an adult and you're like 30 or you're 40, like just because I don't know this particular subject and this particular, but doesn't mean I don't know anything. You know, and you get the folks like my uncles and my aunts. So they'd be like, so what did we learn today about the Iraq War? And like my family would be like, well, see, actually it all started back in the 40s. So let me break it down for you. OGs know. They'll give you the whole context. And the rest of the class will be like, oh, gosh, you know what I'm saying? Like, and the professor would be like, yeah, actually, I didn't know that, right? So you end up with community colleges needing to be the savior. And then there was an investigation into whether or not they could be the savior. And here comes our emphasis on completion. What they found was what you already know. We're not good at getting people to complete anything. As a system, we're awful, okay? Now, does that mean the faculty are awful? No. Does that mean student services are awful? No. You're structured to be awful, okay? You have two-year colleges serving 2 million people. People can kind of come in and out when they want. You rarely have enough counselors. Our systems are antiquated for keeping up with students in counseling, enrollment. You have people taking out loans to go to community college. There's not a lot of student support in most spaces. You end up with faculty that are woefully under-supported for the job that they're supposed to do. They just kind of arrive on campus. There's your classroom. Good luck. Like, what? Yeah, save the country. Go ahead. You know what I mean? Okay, all right? And that's going to be really tough. So the Obama administration was left no choice. You're going to have to pour a ton of money, a ton of energy into the only shot we got at getting America back on track, which are these open access community, well, not the fully open access, but these lower cost community colleges. Okay, and so you end up with where we're at now. I'm going to skip through here so I can get to you. So this is you, all right? This is your profile here. And you can see what your percentage, I don't know if you can see it, but I can see that you have a pretty strong Hispanic population, as you listed it here. I prefer the term Latino, but whatever. And then you have a very a large white population as well, okay? And Santa Barbara College, actually, sorry, let me go back. I'm not good at these. So Santa Barbara City College also has a pretty large white population and a pretty significant Latino population, low African American, low American Indian or indigenous population as well, okay? But when you look at these two side by side here, this is the scorecard here, okay? This is out of the Chancellor's office. Now, there's problems with this, and I'm going to tell you what the problems are. Not problems with you, problem with this. Are y'all following me? Problem with the measurement. Not necessarily you, but here we have on your scorecard here, of the students that come in prepared for college, meaning that usually they don't have to take basic skills courses, about 54% tend to complete in a certain amount of time. For the ones that come in needing basic skills, you're at about 29.1%, creating an overall 33.5. Do you see that? Okay. Similar racial demographic at Santa Barbara, but you can see the numbers are different. Yes? Okay. Dramatically. Yes? Okay. Situating Santa Barbara City College as nationally known as one of the better community colleges in the United States. Okay. This is not a shaming session, okay? And this is not a competition. See, to me, education is not a competition. I'm not into that. I'm not into folks just comparing themselves against other schools in terms of scores, because I'm not interested in that. It doesn't tend to produce the best results for historically targeted populations. But it tends to create a lot of fibbing, a lot of creaming, a lot of stuff like that. Are y'all following me? Okay? But I'm showing you this for a purpose, to kind of highlight something. That while you're looking at these particular ethnic percentages as a layout of the demographics, there's a number of other things that influence how well a college functions, all right? And so it's not just that you have these completion rates that aren't very high. The question is, what is behind it is the question. What is going on? Is that the rain? Welcome to Humboldt, no doubt. Wow, it's like an onslaught. Okay, so when we look at these things here, and I'm going to go back a bit here, all right? So this is San Joaquin Delta College, okay? Now, San Joaquin Delta College, when you take a look at Merritt College, which is in Oakland, San Joaquin Delta is near Stockton or in Stockton. Actually, San Joaquin Delta has a higher percentage of low-income folks than Oakland does. Yet, their completion rates are higher than Merritt College in Oakland, even though they serve lower-income folks, a higher percentage. Are y'all following this? Okay? That's really important. and I'm sorry to skip through these so much. I could give you a headache here. But when you look at these two, I reset it. Check 1, 2. Okay. So what I was saying about the previous slides is that we want to be analytical about how we get our numbers, the way that we get them, from students and faculty work and performance. How do these numbers emerge at our campus, and they might emerge differently at another campus? That's what we want to be thinking about. But the thing I forgot to get to was a critique of this overall scorecard, okay? And I'll just mention a couple of quick things, okay? And I've said them in public. Are you guys okay? You all right? Okay, because, it's like you're sitting and I'm talking. That can be really annoying, I know. But I appreciate it. So think of it, I've mentioned this before, so it's not a secret. I'm not going to get really in trouble because I say it all the time. Here's a problem with the scorecard. It's failure is like embedded in it. Okay? It's like It's like failure's embedded in it, okay? That one, you're looking at this and you're saying, goodness gracious, our students that come in college prepared actually complete more than our students that come in less prepared. Wow. Are you sure? Okay. Because every single college has that dynamic, okay? It means that I have to take fewer classes. It means I don't get caught in the logjam of basic skills, which is largely the reason why so many students don't complete, and this is why we have to do acceleration work, is that we end up having people that get to skip one of the major reasons why people don't finish, so they should complete more, okay? But the other piece, the most important piece, is that these numbers are gauged by tracking cohorts over a 6-year period. Did you hear what I just said? A 6-year period. It's like UC Santa Cruz judging its graduation rates on a 12-year scale. It'd be like 99%. Okay? So the scary thing is, if you did this on a 3-year, we don't know what our numbers would look like. I mean, this is really generous for all of the colleges, not just College of the Redwoods. This is generous. If you do it over 6, reasons why it's problematic, okay, is that it's almost embedding into the evaluation process the problems we time, and I'm so sorry for that. Oh, it's flown by. That's good. I appreciate that. So let me go back, and then I'll just finish with this, okay? So what am I calling for? There's a couple things I'm mentioning here. So one, I mentioned the context of the community colleges as a historically threatening space for the empowerment, liberation, and success of various targeted communities. When I talk about targeted communities, I mention communities of color, but by no means do I mean an exclusion communities of colors, okay? Low income, what we now refer to as white groups, have historically targeted histories that span the length of American history, okay? As Irish, Italian, Russian immigrants, Jewish immigrants, German immigrants, etc., the very targeting that students of color and communities of color experience today were all experiences by the ancestors of currently white populations, okay? Italian folks, etc. Folks experience these very same targeted mechanisms, okay? So this history of the community colleges as serving that population is dangerous to all groups that have been historically targeted, okay? And low-income white communities struggle with an enormous amount of economic and political and health-related calamities that impact quality of life in a very similar way to low-income people of color. Okay, so this equity question is not just a question of race. It's a question of whether or not people who have been historically marginalized are receiving ample opportunity to challenge those systems and raise their status in society. Does this make any sense? Okay, and so I mentioned democratic racism, all these things, because the idea for us as educators is to be reflective on how we are institutions of the very states that have maintained the targeted positions of these communities. And so as institutions, we are not neutral. We have perpetuated the injustices, and many of us as individual faculty or different eras of our institution have fought against them, okay? But what that means is that we need to participate in consistent reflection on all of our practices and the norms of our campus climates, okay? What do I mean by that, okay? And I'll just say this really quickly, and I wanted to get all into this, but I'll get on into this in another time maybe. I know it looks interesting though, doesn't it? I can say it real quick. So when I talk to folks about Humboldt, folks are like, oh, they got the hippies up there, it's really peace, it's all love, so it doesn't make sense that there would be racial disparities, okay? And that's usually because people have a problem. I located these 4 problems. So one, hippie is a very vague category. Like there wasn't like a sign-up sheet, to be a hippie. There wasn't like an interview process. You get what I'm saying? Like at one point, conservatives defined a hippie as having long hair. I mean, a lot of crazy people got long hair, okay? And a lot of beautiful people have long hair. No discrimination intended, okay? But it's a vague category. It's not actually a statement of values or beliefs. Okay, it's actually a category that was kind of projected onto folks that they accepted and then tried to turn into a very empowering statement. But at the same time, you cannot determine that somebody is automatically justice-oriented or refined in their justice work because they've been given a category. I'm black. I know a lot of black people. Not all black people are interested in black success or empowerment. So it'd be foolish of me to assume that they were, okay? Also, you're in a homogenous environment. It's hard to gauge how good you are at multicultural issues when there's not a lot of cultures for you to engage with. Doesn't mean you're not interested. It just means that you might be out of practice, okay? So in a homogenous environment, you don't know how free and open you are, okay? Third, there is this context. It's George Kastiafikis. He does work, wrote a great book on the new left and old left. But the idea of leftist politics was intervened upon in the 60s and 70s, saying that the problem with it was that it was so class-based that it overlooked racial disparities and dynamics, right? And so if you have a culture really evolving out of a very class-based analysis, an anti-capitalist analysis, which is fine, but you're not being self-critical on the ways in which working class folks divide themselves, and racist and classist and sexist ideologies can be deep embedded in the liberal persona, then you're going to make a lot of mistakes. And then lastly, anti-racist or for peace does not constitute alliance. I am anti-sexist, okay? But alliance is about the ways in which your partner or your allying group defines the role, purpose, and significance of your mutual partnership. So if I can be anti-sexist in my ideology, but if in my daily manifestation of my behavior, I'm not reflective on what I'm doing, I can manifest sexism while still believing I'm ideologically anti-sexist. Okay? This is very similar to a basic leftist liberal perspective in a community that is very homogenous. You can say, hey, we're not racist, we're anti-racist. Good for you. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're in the habitus of manifesting anti-racist alliance with other groups of color. Okay? Again, it doesn't make you a Klan member at all. But what it does is it means that you still have a lot of listening and work to do and refinement and study to do. Okay, so and that's allyship, but all right. So I'll talk about this in the session, but what I propose with colleges are things in these areas, okay? That equity work is about allied resistance. It's not about charitable contribution. Okay? It's not about acquiescing to whatever whim you hear from one person over there. It's about allied resistance. So what does that mean for the institution to build itself as an allying institution, or you as a faculty or staff member or an executive to build yourself as an ally to the ongoing 4 centuries-long struggles of the communities that you work with? So very simply, it's 2 things in my opinion. 1, you have to study. Study your community, study who you are, etc. And 2, there's this issue of reflection. And in the reflection piece is a restructuring of what you do as an institution. And more specifically, and I said I was closing like 10 minutes ago, I'm sorry, but specifically, these here, okay? Professional and personal purpose, this is what the equity stuff is about. And here, institutional culture and operations. I'll talk about this in the breakout session in a minute. If you're trying to adjust to address equity in a structure that has historically not addressed equity well, okay, you're actually challenging the norm of your institution. Okay? So, for example, you might know stuff on the ground. I'm a brown guy. I don't know what actions I'm supposed to do. All right? So, very simply, if you haven't reflected on whether or not your curriculum actually addresses the immediate needs and interests of your students in science, the math, the social sciences, whatever it may be, then you're actually missing out on opportunities on engagement, right? You're missing out on opportunities for students to progress in their class, but you're also missing out on opportunities to impact how students then go out and work in the world and operate in the world and change situations. But structurally, for example, we have a lot of faculty that have never learned how to teach. Okay? That's not their fault. You're in a system that has to rely on teaching that never spends any time helping people learn how to teach. It's the biggest mistake in the system. You have like 3 flex days or whatever it is. 2, I mean, how do you do that? Okay? You might even have 2 or 1, I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not math is my point. Okay? And we don't have adequate supervision or support structure. This is often an academic senate collaborative issue as well. But we need support structure. How often does the department chair drop into courses and see how well people are teaching? And be able to have supportive conversations that are not evaluation-based community. If that never happens, who knows how you're teaching? Nobody knows how you're teaching. Okay? If it only happens once at the end of the year, I just let 8 months go by. You don't ruin everything, and now I'm looking at the end. Okay? If we don't have accountability structure for when folks spend money on something, or a program is supposed to be supported, it's not. Who gets reprimanded for that? Who gets support around that? Who gets training around it? Okay? And also we don't practice adequate partnership with the community in many of our colleges. Okay? We have all these resources they develop for themselves. Education centers, health clinics, political education classes, all these things they do, and we're not connected to it. So one of the very sources of how we could do better is completely ignored. And then lastly on that issue of them guide us in it. I know you've been doing it in the corner of the basement of Building J for like 20 years. Right? We don't go to our CTE faculty to ask them on how we should be teaching. Who knows better how to teach the CTE folks? They're the only classes that if you make a mistake, you can die. Okay? Like, if you do this wrong, he dies. Okay? So I have to teach you well, otherwise limbs are lost, blood's everywhere. Okay? But yet we separate. It's like CTE's over there, and we do the real instruction, which is weird because again, no one's trained to teach. Right? And I mean no one. Some people have a lot of. And by the way, you don't need to have teacher credentials to be a teacher. I'm not saying that at all. Okay. So anyhow, this is the way I frame the issue. It's a lot of stuff. Sorry, I did go over a lot. But I have a lot of confidence in most of the community colleges I come to. Okay? And I have a lot of confidence in this one. You have a solid leader trying to make some moves. I don't know everything that happens here, but you seem to be on the right path. Okay? But this is not one of those quick turnaround things. You're going against the United States social structure, and you're going against the history of the California Community College being under-resourced. Okay? So this will take time, a lot of commitment, and a lot of reflection, and I'll shut it down. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Is this on? No. Okay. Whatever.